James Day, public television pioneer and chairman of the CUNY TV Advisory Board, passed away in April 2008. His legacy includes the series Day at Night, which aired for 130 episodes beginning in 1973. The program features interviews with many of the great thinkers and achievers of the 20th century. These 30-year-old programs have been restored. The interviews remain fresh and relevant today, exploring issues that are still important to society. Showing them again is CUNY TV's tribute to Jim and his contributions to public television.
A writer with the body of an elephant and the tongue of an asp. That's the way columnist John Crosby once described Abe Burrows, the Brooklyn boy whose skill at satire was originally known only to a select group of comedy writers and comedians for whom he used to perform at Hollywood parties, winning him the title as the wit's wit. But the whole country laughed with him when, in the late 40s and early 50s, he was given his own radio and television shows. And then in 1950, with the success of Guys and Dolls, he was the co-author, a new chapter opened for Abe Burrows as a stage director and writer, and as that most specialized of Broadway occupations, a play doctor, the man who rescues sick shows from sudden death at the box office. Mr. Burrows, you're working on Good News. That's an old show, late 1927.
27, yeah.
Why are so many old shows brought back to Broadway? What's the reason for the popularity of revivals? No, Nanette, Irene?
Yeah. But, you know, as a matter of fact, I'm involved with this, the same producer who produced No, Nanette and Irene. See, I don't like the word revival. Revival means that something is dead and you've revived it, you know, like Lazarus. But this isn't true. These things that come back are classics. And although I don't equate them with Aida or La Boheme, nobody calls those operas revivals when they come back. These are classics of their own kind.
But not of their own time, necessarily.
Not of it. Well, Guys and Dolls, when I did Guys and Dolls, my first show, it was 1950. And ever since then, it has played steadily throughout the country and throughout the world. It has never died, never stopped. It's played in summer stock, it's played in schools, and it's a lot of kids know it. It's part of the...
And it's not just nostalgia or
camp.
No,
it's musical repertory. Guys and Dolls actually was a kind of a period show when I first did it. And now here I have a thing, Good News, with songs like The Best Things in Life Are Free and Varsity Drag and Just Imagine. Good Lord, we all got engaged to Just Imagine every night, you know, and things like that. It's a classic, and I've adapted it for Alice Faye. Remember Alice Faye?
Yes.
Now Alice is marvelous, and I adapted it for her, and I have Rochester with Jack Benny and John Payne, and I'm bringing it back that way. And
does adapting it mean rewriting it?
I had to rewrite somewhat for Alice.
What do you rewrite?
I changed the part. I took one man's role, made a woman's role out of it, made a man professor, a lady professor.
Why?
Because I wanted a part for her in a real stature, and it's not a fake, and it sort of fits in. I expanded a part of a man. It's a woman's part, and now she sort of motivates the whole play.
But it has nothing to do with the times, then?
No.
How did you get into show business? I've read somewhere where your father had an interest in show business. He loved vaudeville.
Yeah, he did, but my mother wanted me to be a doctor, so I went to pre-med at college. And
School of Finance, didn't you?
Then I switched. Then I decided I didn't want to be a doctor. They wanted me to be a doctor because when I was 10 years old, I took a cinder out of my grandmother's eye.
Really?
And they all said, my goodness, what marvelous hands he had. So they wanted me to be a doctor. I really didn't want to be a doctor. And I switched to the School of Finance, went to work on Wall Street.
In 1929.
I was there in 29, yeah.
The height of the Depression.
The crash, but you know, it's very interesting. The crash was very sad for all the people had stocks, but all of us who worked on Wall Street did very well because business was great and we got bonuses and overtime and everything. And then I sort of floundered around. I did everything. And I went into show business not for the reasons that people always tell in magazine articles about dreaming of it all the time. I just wanted to make a living, and I found out I could sell jokes. So I began selling jokes to people like Henny Youngman and Eddie Garr and people like that. They would pay you $2 up to $7.50 for a joke.
Well, selling or creating a joke seems to me not just to be a mechanical process.
No.
That you've got to have a mind that
Well,
looks at life in a humorous way.
I used to be that way. Jokes and comedy, it was always my adjustment to life. I once said that where other kids were throwing rocks, I used to make jokes. It was my way of...
What kind of life was it as a youngster that caused you to look at life in this way?
Well, no, not bitterly, but all kids have that stuff. The adults are so tall, and they seem mean. Later you find out that they didn't really mean to be mean. Yeah. But I used to defend myself with jokes in my head and stuff like that. And finally, when somebody told me they could buy jokes, I began to make up jokes. And the early jokes I used to make up were in Depression times. And they were a big vogue for panhandler jokes. It's very sad, but they were jokes, panhandlers. Fellows, you know, buy me a cup of coffee, you know. Can I have, I wrote a joke for Andy Youngman. Can I have 10 cents for a cup of coffee? A panhandler came up to me and says, can I have 10 cents for a cup of coffee? And I said, coffee's only a nickel. And he said, won't you join me? Things like that, you know. And he still uses that. Paid me $2 for it.
And your success beginning at $2 led finally to...
I found that I could do it, and finally I got a chance with Ed Gardner to do a show on CBS, to work on it, and I began to learn.
That was Duffy's Tavern, of course.
Well, later, Duffy's Tavern developed from that.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
Oh.
And then later I worked the Texaco Star Theater, and then I wrote the Rudy Valley John Barrymore show, and then we did Duffy's Tavern, and I was a head writer of Duffy's Tavern, and I was with that for 5 years.
It was a great hit in those days. I recall it so vividly.
It was a good show.
What was good about it?
It was literate. Gardner, the star, and the boss was a man with great taste and editorial sense, and I was very lucky to have certain teachers. The Talmud has a saying that a man has to do two things for himself. One is to choose his own teacher, to choose a teacher, and to choose a best friend. And I had the good fortune with teachers. I had, in radio, was Ed Gardner, and in the theater was George S. Kaufman.
I want to ask you about Kaufman later, but why was Gardner a good teacher?
Because he had taste and knowledge and stuff. I came in very green. I thought a joke was a joke, and you had it in, and I knew nothing. See, a man can't teach you how to write jokes or how to be funny, but he can give you an editorial sense. And he'd say to me, that's corny. And I'd say, why? You know, I just didn't see. And then gradually I began to understand. It was a matter of weeding out the stuff.
He was Archie in Duffy's Tavern, the principal character, for those who don't recall Duffy's Tavern.
And Shelley Booth was in it. Yeah. She was Miss Duffy. And it was, he was Archie was his name in the show, not Duffy.
That's right.
Yeah,
Duffy was the
Archie,
owner. But
yeah, he would say, hello, Duffy's Tavern, what do you eat, meat to eat? Archie, the manager, speaking. Duffy ain't here. Oh, hello, Duffy. Yeah. That was the opening phone call. Yeah.
Then you went on to the Joan Davis show.
Then I did a lot. Then I began to do...
I mentioned that because it was on the Joan Davis show where you first performed, was it not?
Well, it was actually, Joan held her audience one night. I'd been writing these songs. I used to write songs to make fun of my songwriter friends. I would tease them. And I used to write various type songs, love type songs, and making fun of the
girl
kind.
The girl with the
three blue eyes, and I am strolling down memory lane without a single thing to remember, and things like that. And CBS began to feel that an audience would like it. Ernie Martin, who later produced Guys and Dolls, asked me to try it with an audience, and I think I chickened for a while. And one day, Joan caught me off guard, and she kept the preview audience there and introduced me. And I went on, and I made a 15-minute recording with an audience. They liked it. And then I became a performer. And
before you became a performer, you were performing more or less in private, weren't you?
At parties.
At parties.
Oh, yeah, all the parties. I was a lion, they called it, lionized. I used to go to places where I didn't even know the people. I went to so many parties, and I'd write these silly songs and play them, and it was a rib. And then I went on the air and performed, and I went into nightclubs and hotels. I had about 3.5, 4 years to perform, and then I did all these panel shows. And then I went back to being a writer.
While you were still performing for parties for all kinds of famous people, including many people who were famous for comedy.
Yeah.
Robert Benchley, one of America's greatest humorists, described you as one of America's great satirists.
Yeah, well, he was marvelous to me. Bob was. He was worried when I became a performer. He was worried that I would do what he did. He gave me a long story, because once he started to act, he stopped writing. Bob told me a story. He says he stopped writing, gave up his typewriter, and the Herald Tribune, he told me a story once that the Herald Tribune had an editorial that Bob Benchley is giving up his typewriter. And Bob says, you know what I got from that? He said, I got about 100 letters asking for the typewriter. But he walked up to me at a party one day and he says, could you write a song for me called 2 Little Words, I Love You? And I wrote such a song. And we became very good friends. And he was marvelous to me, but he was one who chiefly encouraged me to stay with writing and not just, you know, when I was acting, when I was performing, after a while, nightclubs, I stopped creating for a while. I stopped writing.
It's easier in a sense, isn't it?
Well, what you do in nightclubs and hotels, you begin to do the sure things, your best things, and you don't dare try anything new. You might get hit with a highball glass. Yeah. And that stops you for a while. And I went back then, when I went back to the theater, it was full-time writing.
Did you have any teachers other than Ed Gardner and Kaufman out of those years? I'm thinking of these people we're talking about now.
A lot of people, I think, were wonderful.
And what
to
teachers,
work with.
really stronger word than I
want. Lindsay and Krauss were a great influence on me. And, as I say, Kaufman and a great many of the people I worked with, including some of the actors. I learned so much working with Ethel Merman, with Julie Harris. You learn from everyone who was really good, you know.
So then you, as you said, you performed in nightclubs, and then you had your own CBS radio show and later television show. Now, the radio show came out of in a sense, the parties and the fame that you built up.
I used to sit at the piano and noodle.
But it's quite a jump from parties to CBS radio. At least it was for CBS.
Oh yes.
What were they afraid of in those days? What were the taboos that frightened?
Well, it was automatic. You know, I'd written radio for years, and as a matter of fact, it shows up in my theater writing. I have never had, I don't think ever, a dirty word in a play, or much of a swear word. You know, Guys and Dolls, which was about mugs and, you know, gangsters sort of, had one word, hell. That was the only word. He says, what the hell kind of a doll are you? And that was a shocker to her. As a matter of fact, it worked dramatically, because it was a shocker to the heroine, as it was a missionary, as much as it was, I thought, to the audience. But I just didn't think that way. So my censorship was largely self. I've never had that trouble. You just didn't do it. And I still don't say things on the stage that I wouldn't say in a room.
Of course, the common use of those words does remove their greatest value, which is their shock value.
Yeah, it becomes a bore. It's just a substitute, you know. You say you got a good filthy word to replace for goodness sake, you know. And that's it. And then after a while, it's as good, same as saying heavens to Betsy, you know. But I just don't think that way, and I don't talk that way. But I do think that the new, quote, permissiveness in that department does give you a little bit of a sense of freedom. I imagine in writing in the old days, when you just had to be really careful, you did shut off a part of your brain.
What brought about the transition then from performing to Broadway and Guys and Dolls?
Same way as I was talked into going into radio. I was talked into, I'm a guy, people asked me to do things and I do them. Somebody came to me and asked me to do Guys and Dolls. Ernie Martin, who worked with me at CBS. And he and Cy Feuer were producing it, and Frank Lesser was a very dear friend of mine.
You knew Frank Lesser at this time?
Yeah, I knew Frank a long time before. And we were good friends, and I said, great. And I did that. But I was a little hesitant about the security of radio and television stuff, which I had then. But I finally decided to do it, and then it changed my whole life. I loved the theater.
What was Guys and Dolls was a huge success.
Yes.
And
It was very painful because it was my first one, and it sort of won all the nickels, you know, like it. And then I thought, my goodness, how long has this been going on? It's a cinch. Found out it wasn't that easy.
what was the source of the success of Guys and Dolls? Of course, Damon Runyon and his stories undoubtedly were a factor, as Frank Lester's music was.
Sure.
But you say it's still running. Do you still view New York in a Runyon-esque way?
Well, we called it a musical fable. See, Damon Runyon came from Florida, Dade County, and he's talked to me about Duffy's Tavern. He knew about it. I knew him a little before that, not too long. As a matter of fact, he had lost his voice by then, and he used to write notes. But he liked it, and he said he's from Florida, you know, and he wrote a kind of an idealized New York fella. And in Duffy's Tavern, if you recall, my theory was to treat these mugs as ladies and gentlemen. I wrote Duffy's Tavern and Guys and Dolls as though I were Noel Coward. I mean, I thought that way. And so we had this elegant kind of thing, and there was no weapon used, there was no fighting, nothing. It was all ladies and gentlemen. They were speaking as though they were playing private lives. Mm-hmm. And that was the secret of it, I think.
And the source of its humor.
Also, it was the first essentially funny libretto that had been done in a long time. Musical comedy used to dismiss the book, you know, or sometimes it was romantic like operetta, you know.
Desert Song.
Desert Song, and even Oklahoma, which didn't strive too much for humor and stuff. There was beautiful, moving thing. But Guys and Dolls was comedy-oriented. And I think it was the first one like that was full comedy, and it still gets the same laughs that a French farce does. Yeah. It gets the big laughs that I got later in a thing like Cactus Flower, which booming laugh. And musicals didn't used to get that.
And there are some people, I suppose, who will say they don't make musicals like that anymore. Of course, there was a time not too long ago when this kind of musical was at its height.
Well, but I did later, 12 years later, 11 years later, I did How to Succeed in Business without really trying, with the same kind of laughter. Mm-hmm. My orientation has always been that. Laughter has been my orientation.
You've been quoted as saying that everything you do is serious. Funny is just your method.
Well, yeah, well, the way it is when I'm out on lecture tours, the first question I'm asked when I call for questions is, Mr. Burrows, haven't you ever wanted to do anything serious? And I say everything I do is serious. It just comes out funny, which is true. I'm a very serious man.
Has your view of what is important as well as what's serious changed over the years?
No, I don't think so. I'm very serious about everything. I just write about it funny. I mean, I think the problem, Nathan Detroit trying to find a place for his crap game in Guys and Dolls, and Finch in How to Succeed in Business trying to become chairman of the board. Very serious, because the men who do that are serious. I just treated it funny, and I looked at it with a crooked eye. Mm-hmm. That's all.
Humor, I think you've said, is a serious thing with a curve.
Well, I said once that humor is a way to keep from killing yourself.
Why?
Well, I think it's a way of looking at things so the world won't appear too deadly to you.
Has it appeared deadly to you?
Well, it always is kind of deadly. First of all, we're all going to die.
Yes.
So that's deadly by definition. Mm-hmm. And secondly, when I pick up papers today, if I didn't laugh, what would I do? There's no choice. There's no, you got to say, well, you're kidding. You got to be kidding, sir. Whoever you read about, And it's just everything in the news today, just on the verge of deadly hilarity. It really is just at the line. That's why the cartoonists are able to do so well now. They're able. It's a field day for cartoonists. Field day for Art Buchwald.
Is it a different kind of humor? One you were performing, your satire, as you said, dealt in large measure with June Moon and satirizing your Tin Pan Alley composer friends.
Yeah, then I spread out.
But now it's a more bitter kind of humor today, isn't it?
Yeah,
Does this reflect itself in your own writing?
I began to spread out. I think How to Succeed was a satire on the corporate image. Mm-hmm. And the only thing about it is the humorist always suffers from one thing, because the humorist doesn't really change things. He gives people a good look at it.
It's just
but-
relief from it.
Yeah, it's a
then.
relief, but because the humorists who pride themselves on the fact that ridicule could destroy Adolf Hitler, it couldn't. Took more than ridicule. Humor is a way to kind of look at it, because I saw, when I did How to Succeed in Business, I had this fellow Finch who was climbing and doing the most dreadful things, and the audience is laughing with him, you know, because each person he's knifing is worse than he is, so they're rooting. But I remember playing at places where big corporation executives came up to me and said, "Hey, Abe, that was great. You know, we got a guy just like that in the office."
Yeah.
You didn't know I meant him. See, he didn't think it was him.
It's striking the universal.
But he thought it was somebody else.
Yeah.
So I realized, I think a great many humorists, certain ones exaggerate their own power. Oh, they're good for the world. But if they think they're moving mountains, you don't move it with laughs. Has to be a totally humorless fella steps up one day and says, "You, sir, we subpoena you, you're under arrest." That fella, and that ain't funny. See, that's the key, I think.
Has one thing you've done on Broadway given you more satisfaction than the others? Guys and Dolls, I suppose, because it was the first in the...
My first child, you know. And so that gave me wonder. How to Succeed was very satisfying. It was about something I'd been living through
Of course,
in
you
my
got the
years.
Pulitzer Prize. for
And I
that,
got a
too.
Pulitzer Prize, which is, it's better than a poke with a sharp stick, you know. But that gave me a great deal of satisfaction. But I don't know. I love, what gives me the greatest satisfaction is working in the theater, just being there.
Why?
I don't know. I went to rehearsal yesterday, the other day, and my wife looked at me, and I was nervous about some new things, and she says, "You know, I feel like," we had seen Airport, the movie Airport, and she says, "I feel like a pilot's wife whenever you start rehearsing." And it's true. I go in with a sense of newness, and it's fresh, and it's great. And you renew it each time you go back in. I think that's why people do so many shows. You get that renewed feeling. I love actors. I love being with them.
That must be a rather important qualification for success.
Yeah, you can't think of them as puppets. They're people. I learn from them. They learn from me. And there's a great interrelationship that I find wonderful.
And the relationship with the audience itself must be important, because you've said audiences have their best times when they're a part of the show on stage.
An audience.
How do you bring that about? Bring about that relationship?
Well, a good comedy writer must write for the audience. For instance, he writes a line and he expects the audience to laugh. He must allow for that. There must be a pause, there must be rhythm, and the director must allow for it. Now the audience participates. Now if the audience doesn't respond, there's a big hole in your show. The dialogue will sound dreadful, you know? and so they're part of it. Also, they must pay attention. I lecture audiences when I go out on the road. We're playing Boston, Toronto, and Washington, and we're touring a great deal before we come into New York with good news. But I lecture audience, ladies. I tell them they have to pay attention. You know, I work like a dog to set out the plot at the beginning, what we call the exposition. We try to get it over with fairly quickly. If the audience is not paying attention, we've got to belabor it. You know, if they're not listening, if they're watching each other's clothes. And I tell them they are really part of the show. And fix your eyes on that stage, and for goodness sake, listen to what we're saying. I holler at these ladies.
You've built quite a reputation as a play doctor, coming in on plays that aren't working before they, I guess, open.
Yeah. I didn't do that much. I got that reputation once in 1951.
Just one great operation, I suppose. Huh?
No, actually what happened is in 1951 I came in on a show adapted from a Molnar play called Make-A-Wish, and the play was The Good Fairy, and they were in trouble in Philadelphia, and I'd agreed to do it, but I didn't want my name involved. And then I rewrote the show, and in about 2 weeks, but in the meantime an investigative reporter, like they have today, dug out that I was doing it.
I see.
And he told everybody, he told them, and he wrote a great big, a very nice article about me called Mr. Fix-It, and I became a doctor ever since. I've done about 3 or 4 of them, but...
That's all?
I don't know, that's about it.
Yes.
But so I got this reputation for it. I've done a couple successfully. But generally, they're hard to doctor because when you call in a play doctor, you're
already in trouble.
The undertaker should be right behind you.
What is the secret of the success of a show? Do you know?
No, if I did, something happens. I think we call it. It got to happen. There must be that spark that happens between an audience, the actors, the stage, and suddenly everything comes to life. I've seen shows which were rather bad shows. I thought that opening night was sensational. Something crackled, and then people came the next night, and Walter Kerr once told me, they'd say to him, "What'd you rave about that show for?" You know, he says he gets more bad letters for shows he's praised than for shows he's knocked, because people are disappointed. And he evidently saw it on a night when the darn thing happened. It's a crackle, you know?
One reporter wrote about you at the point where you first performed in that post-broadcast Joan Davis show, when you heard that audience applaud. It was almost like a narcotic. And I guess anybody who's performed remembers that. That wonderful feeling of being recognized and the audience responding immediately.
Well, laughter is like a cushion. I watched Eddie Enns in Rochester, who was in our show at the first rehearsal, and he was reading, and we got about 40 people in the company. The kids all laugh, and they respond just like an audience. And I watched, he was a little nervous, but then suddenly he got his first laugh, and it was as though he'd been given a mantle, and he relaxed. You could hear that laughter coming. The laughter is sort of, it's appreciation. It's a cloak the audience puts around you.
The question I wanted to ask is, do you miss it now? Not that you're working
Performing?
in the theater? Yes.
No, I'm a performing director. If you ever came to one of my rehearsals, you'd see. So that I get that. And once in a while I come and I talking to you, Jim, and I do panel shows, and I go on with the nighttime shows once in a while, you know. And I enjoy that. But I did it. I've learned to do it this way. I never was the kind of performer. I've watched certain performers who are not alive until that moment they go on. You have dinner with them early before the show, and it's like having dinner with a mummy. They suddenly, their eyes glaze. Come showtime, they look at their watch, and their eyes glaze, and they vanish from you. Until they get on, and that's like a narcotic. They get on stage, and then when I was performing in nightclubs, I got sick of my dinner jacket. You know, I got tired of it. I'm not built that way. I'm not that sort of ham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burrows.
Thank you.
Enjoyed having you.